Hello and welcome to the Franchise Tag Podcast with me, your host, Freddie Hall. I hope you're doing all okay. I hope you're liking the new haircut I've got. The long hair of Jesus has gone. It's more of a Heath Ledger style now going on. Got the sun shining through the window. What a gorgeous weekend we have for the bank holiday. Make sure you like and subscribe our podcast and share it to all your friends. Thank you for all the support that we have had so far. This is going to be the first video, but we've not talked about a quarterback nor an offensive weapon, so to speak. However, he is still a massive name, and we have Matt joining us from the Roar of the Lions UK podcast. He is the host of that. And of course, we are here to talk about Penei Sewell today. But Matt, how have you been in general? What glorious weekend we have had.
It's been great, hasn't it? It's such a relief to have some sun finally. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's been great.
Well, thank you for joining us. And like I said, we're going to talk all about Penei Sewell, the offensive tackle who got picked by the Lions, only 20 years old, from American Samoa, a little tiny island just off of Samoa, was at Oregon College. He did opt out in the 2020 season due to COVID, but was always talked about as the hottest prospect. And really outside of Trevor Lawrence and Kyle Pitts, was seen as probably the most sure bet to succeed in the NFL. Lots of avenues the Lions could have gone down here, Matt, with having this pick and who has gone so far. What was your reaction to Penei Sewell getting his name called out and holding up that Lions jersey? Or in fact, he might even have been at home holding up the Lions cap and officially becoming a Detroit Lion.
Yeah, it was great to see him at home surrounded by his family, and he was clearly made up to come here. And being a Detroit Lions fan, sometimes you're not always convinced that that's the case. We're not the most glamorous franchise, as you may be aware. You know, our glory days are 60 years behind us now. So to see someone actually really, really happy to be here is fantastic. In terms of the reaction at the time, we were broadcasting live at the time on the pod, and I think it was a mix of emotions. Some of us were absolutely delighted that he was coming, and I think there's a kind of reluctant consensus that it was the best value pick on the board, no matter which way we were going, unless you were a Fields fan, and leave that to one side perhaps. But I personally was delighted. I think that my number one guy on the board that I thought was realistic that might fall to us was Jalen Waddle, and obviously he went a pick before. Second one was Chase, third was Pitts. So of my four guys, he was kind of in that mix. I wasn't really fussed as to who it was. I think that it provides the highest floor for our franchise going forward. If you think that the Lions aren't going to be competing this year, then what provides the franchise with the best chance of competing in years 3 and 4 of this contract? And I think that an offensive tackle is probably the answer there. A wide receiver tends to be a bit more of a boom or bust candidate than a tackle. So I was happy.
Obviously, Freddie said at the top of the show, this guy is one of the big names out of college. I know I watched a lot of his season in the 2019. Obviously, they were a quite electric team to watch. You know, Justin Herbert was there as well. And after that season, and all the big names went out, he was tipped, I think, as the number one player in college, ranked wise, over everyone in college. What impressed you the most of his time at college?
The thing about him at college was, one of his weaknesses, and I know we're going to talk about that later, is the lack of tape there is. So he played 6 games in his rookie year, and he played then a full season afterwards, the 2019 year, and then he said he opted out. So there's not a huge amount to go on, but what really does jump out is his athleticism. It's almost like watching a wide receiver on release in the run blocking. He gets off the line so smoothly. It's fantastic. There are numerous examples where you will see him get off the line and be able to block the nickel cornerback or an inside linebacker before the running back has got close to him. Like, before the defense has been able to react, he's at that second level, and you just don't see that from any offensive lineman, not as regularly as he's able to do it anyway. The other thing about it is the number of times he's able to block at the first and then the second level. It happens so often that the edge defender will just toss him aside, and then he'll be able to get to that linebacker level. So I'm so excited about what it's going to do for our run game. Our offensive line is meant to be our strength, our only strength. And if he's actually able to unlock the run game, because we heard this before, our offensive line is our strength, and yet our run game seems to not go anywhere. And it's like, okay, well, Stafford can throw. Well, Goff isn't Stafford. in that regard. So the run game has to work. And to do that, the line actually has to get some run blocking in there, and he is excellent at that. But in terms of another aspect of something at him at college that I'd like to highlight is his mindset is fantastic. When he was getting recruited from high school, he had 23 concrete offers from colleges, including the heavyweights, Alabama, USC, Florida, LSU, Michigan, Notre Dame. They all went for him. But he went to Oregon because he felt that the family atmosphere was right for him. The coaching staff were right for him. He didn't look at the big name college and thought, I want to go there because I want a national championship. He was focused on, I want to be the best player I can for the NFL. And that's where it's going to happen for me. And I think someone who can kind of step back and see the big picture is a sort of intelligence that you want to see in your team. He's not only the athleticism that he brings, and he's going to be a leader on that field. He knows exactly what he wants.
Yeah, I think, like you said at the start as well, he's brought that mentality already, saying, he wants to be at the Lions. So, he's done it again with the NFL teams. I know he didn't get to pick an NFL team, but, he's up for the challenge and the mentality of rebuilding and looking forward with Detroit. So, it's comparable there from the university.
Yeah.
Well, I said to Andrew before we started this is, like I said at the top of the show, we've looked at quarterbacks, we've looked at wide receivers, tight ends, offensive weapons, whatever you want to call it. You when you look at them, you look at stats, you see yards, you see catches, you see touchdowns, etc. Offensive lineman then becomes very different research. I found straight away. But the only stat I needed was allowed 1 sack in 1,376 snaps over 2 seasons. Like, that's impressive. Even for someone who doesn't know offensive line stats, I know that's really, really good. And it must be really positive when you hear things like that. Like, I saw the highlights earlier. I started watching some of them, and everything that you said, Matt, is absolutely correct. The second level he works on, the leadership. That was the leadership qualities was the biggest thing. Not that surprised me, because like you said, when they were drafting, they're saying he wanted to be at Oregon and he was a leader in that team. But watching it actually on screen, it was impressive to see someone like him really taking the bull by the horns and taking the team on his back. And, I looked at it and I was like, well, I can see why Justin Herbert got drafted so high, because players like him allow these players with so much talent to be able to shine and be able to show off what they are good at. And that's what Justin Herbert got the opportunity to do in 2019, because he had players like Sewell in front of him to be able to protect him. And yeah, I've got 0 sacks in 2019, over 926 snaps. He had 7 and only 7 pressures and 2 QB hits. That's just crazy. I mean, he's a freak athlete and a real hybrid player of speed and athleticism, just like you said, Matt. And with that, people did say that though Penei Sewell is going to be incredible in the NFL, that people were looking at not Christian Darrisaw, who was the other offensive lineman who went really high.
Rashawn Slater.
Rashawn Slater, that's one. People were saying that he was going to be the more NFL-ready guy. But do you think that maybe that Sewell will integrate into the NFL very quickly, and especially under the new head coach, Dan Campbell, who only come this year? He's a very vibrant coach, to say the least. Everyone's heard of him. If you didn't know about him, you know about him now, because the guy likes to talk and he's very fun on camera. Do you think he's going to learn a lot over there with Dan Campbell and that new staff and in the city of Detroit?
Yeah, I don't think his integration, to take the first question first, I don't think that's going to be an issue in terms of his mindset. We've already talked about, that he's kind of there already. He's someone who in training camps so far has shown that he's dedicated. He's, everywhere he needs to be, kind of shadowing the O-line, trying to ensure that his preparation is matching that of the pros, that he's learning as much as he can from the coaches. Questions. It's really refreshing to hear that someone has that sort of commitment. So I think he's got a sort of veteran attitude already. In terms of his quality, he's going to be starting right tackle. He was the starting right tackle in high school, and then he played left tackle as a true freshman in college and didn't play right tackle at all. At Oregon, he did kind of move across the line depending on where they were going to decide to run, but he was primarily a left tackle. So I worry about this a little bit. I think that in the press conferences that have happened so far since rookie minicamp and the OTAs that are happening at the moment, Dan Campbell's come out and said he does look like a rookie, which is refreshingly honest and also slightly worrying. But you kind of want to hear that from you guys at the moment. It's very early in the process, so we don't expect anything else from him. But he's come out and said himself, it's like someone, you're right-handed, you write all the time right-handed, and then someone says, full speed, write your name left-handed, go. Like, it's going to take an adjustment, and year one might be underwhelming for some people who are expecting him to perform at all-pro level straight away. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think his floor, as I said, is very high. So in terms of what he might lack in right tackle technique, he's going to make up for with his athleticism and his kind of mauler mentality. But some of the more technically gifted pass rushers might have some joy in year one. Year two, I expect him to be at a Pro Bowl level from the off. I think, a year's probably going to be what it takes for him. But one of the things that we were speaking about earlier, in terms of his leadership, one of the things that he's really good at is communication with his guard. And the only question mark on our line is at right guard. And the presumed starter at the moment is Big B, Halapuli Bharti Vaitai. And he did not have the best year last year, partially due to injury. But he also looked slightly out of place at right guard, having started tackles for the Eagles and being swing tackle the Eagles. So where that might be a weak spot, I think Sewell is actually going to help Big V become a good guard, because he may not have the right tackle technique, Sewell, but he's going to work well in tandem with Big V. So that's going to be really good. In terms of what you said about Dan Campbell, I think his leadership from the top is going to be inspiring to Sewell. But in terms of what he's going to learn from him, I'm not sure that Dan is going to be moving the needle here or there. But what I would highlight is we have one of the league's best O-line coaches. He's called Hank Fraley. We managed to retain him from the previous regime. And it tells you everything when I say that the Pittsburgh Steelers made him an offer, were highly, highly trying to recruit him into their organization. If you think about the Steelers and what they're really, really good at, O-line play is one of those things. And just the organization in general is quality at the kind of coaches level. So they saw in Hank what we see in Hank, which is someone who can develop talent really, really well. And you only have to look at last year to see examples of this. So at right tackle, it was meant to be Vaitai starting. He went down with an injury in camp, and so we had to start our 2018 fifth round pick, Tyrol Crosby. Now, Crosby hadn't shown us much up till now, and he comes in as a starter, and he is an average to kind of lower level starter in the league. That's perfect. Out of a fifth round 2018 guy who's not expected to be a starter, and that came about because Hank was able to get the best out of it. And then that guy went down, and we had to start a guy called Matt Nelson, who was in his second year transitioning from defensive ends, who was not highly recruited. There wasn't much thought of him. He was UDFA from a couple of years ago. And he played really well too at right tackle, playing against some of the best pass rushers in the league. If you think about Chicago's pass rush, Matt Nelson held Mac to no sacks in a game, and he's our third string right tackle. So Hank Fraley is going to get the absolute best out of Penei Sewell. He's walked into one of the best situations he could in the league here, I think.
I'm sorry, Andrew. I as a Steeler, I'm gutted. You've just. I'm so excited about Najee Harris. Now all the excitement's just ran away from me. It's been sucked out of me. That's it. I've done that. Our O-line's trash. It's not going to.
I think you'll be fine, Fred. I won't worry about it. You briefly touched on what you think his challenges might be going into the NFL there with moving to right tackle. But I know you've mentioned that you don't think there was much tape on him with his 1 year, but that 1 year was spectacular. So I think if you do watch it, did you see from looking at that one spectacular any other weaknesses that he might bring as a player through to the NFL?
Maybe a few. I mean, just to outline how good he was PFF's highest rated tackle of all time in a single season in 2019. He won the Outland Trophy as the nation's best O-lineman. So there's not much to go on here. But there are a few things. His first step is so explosive, kind of shifting out, especially in pass protection. It was so fast that a couple of times he got beaten inside with just kind of slower guys who were just like, oh, I can just go through that gap. One of the things that Sewell's really good at is recovering. So even when that happened, he was able to kind of shove him aside a little bit. And maybe the guy beat Sewell eventually, but missed the quarterback because he's kind of been shifted just offline a bit. A couple of the other things that he has is that sometimes he can go a little high in his technique. So he just kind of has to get a little bit lower, bend the knees. But that was really rare too. It happened a couple of times all season. Like you said, he only gave up one sack in his college career, which isn't the best measure of how good an O-line is. I think pressure rate is probably a more reliable thing because sacks rely on someone actually finishing. And if you've got someone like Justin Herbert, I think that's going to help because obviously he's very good at releasing quickly if he needs to. So I think Herbert and Sewell actually helped each other, quite frankly, in that regard, at least in terms of the stats. The main weakness, I'm going to maintain it's the lack of experience. He just didn't play that much. In the freshman year, he was still an all-freshman, all-American freshman list, or whatever that's called. He only played 6 games. But it was only 6 games, and then he played 13 games in year 2. So he's played 19 total games of college football. It's not enough for me to say that he's going to be really, really good. And you've got to recognize that the Pac-12 is potentially one of the worst conferences in football. He hasn't actually played any edge defenders who are kind of worth their salt on a consistent basis. So not much tape and no quality against him. He's looked fantastic at who's come up against him. Obviously, if it was someone else to tackle, then those edge defenders might have been looked more favorably because they would have got more joy. So you only got to beat what's in front of you, right? But let's see him get tested against Mac, against Chicago. That's going to be the real test.
Yeah, I think when you watch tape and you're singling out one player and you're only watching them, it's a little bit easier to kind of pick out things. I noticed that when I went back and watched all the tape on Jamar Chase, who we spoke about last week. And for me, the only thing I could really nitpick at him for was when you do watch the plays that he got beat, I'd say it was probably his hand placement was where his error is. But I think that's something when you've got Taylor Decker, left tackle. I think he's going to be perfect for him to learn those small little nitpicky things from. So I think that's going to be sorted real quick. So if he shows up like 2019 with those little adjustments, I don't think there's any real shocking weaknesses there at all. I think it is nitpicking.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know whether it's part of kind of his heritage and the family and where he comes from, but he's a really prideful guy. He takes it very personally when things go wrong. So some of the things that he missed actually when he was in sort of zone blocking and swing passes and whatever, he's trying to get out to block some of the corners, and he kind of just slightly misses his block, but doesn't quite finish like he'd want to. You see him visibly kind of punch the ground, shout at himself, like he's really angry at himself. And it's really encouraging to see someone that cares so much. Like, it's really going to help us. And you're right, Taylor Decker is an absolute trooper. He got a new deal last season, and people thought, oh, that's a bit much for him. I think it was something like 17 million a year on average to make him one of the highest tackles in the league, paid-wise. And a lot of my guys on the podcast were like, I'm not sure he's going to live up to that. And he absolutely did. I think he was in the top 5 PFF rated tackles last year. And then PFF went and rated him at number 19 in their tackles list. And it's like, hang on a minute. Come on, where's the recency bias? He's much better than that. So, yeah, he's walked into a really good situation with a lot of professionals that can show him what's what and what to do and where he's lacking in technique. So he's in a great situation.
We touched on it earlier about your opinion of your reaction of the pick, I suppose. But being someone who does the podcast like you do, obviously has a lot of interaction with UK Detroit fans and US Detroit fans. Maybe you can speak a little bit on behalf of the fan base here, I suppose, which is a lot of pressure on your shoulders, admittedly. But when you do look at the holes that the Lions do have, and I agree with you, I think the Sewell, that may not be the flashy pick, but is definitely the solid pick for the future. And like you said, with a good O-line already, nothing wrong with having a fantastic O-line and having a lot of good O-linemen for that matter. Was there a feeling amongst the Lions fan base that they wanted more of the flashy pick? I suppose Devontae Smith was still on there. Admittedly, a lot of people would have said, like you said before, Chase being number 1, Pitts maybe number 2, or vice versa, Jalen Waddle being there. In all my mock drafts, I had Jalen Waddle going to the Lions, and I didn't think that was going to be any different until the Jamar Chase pick with the Bengals, which shocked me at the time. So was there a bit of a feeling that, there is holes on this team? Did we need another O-lineman when we have some good O-linemen? Look at I know you've lost some people this year trading away Matt Stafford, but you brought in Jared Goff, Kenny Golladay, obviously left them and joined Andrews Giants. Wide receivers, you got Brashard Perriman, Tyrell Williams, Quintez Cephas, drafted Amon-Ra St. Brown in the low rounds. I think it was the 2nd round pick for you guys. Was there a feeling amongst the fan base for I would have liked the fresh pick, or maybe even we should have moved down if we weren't going to get the flashy pick? We could move down, got some more picks, and if you maybe moved to 18, for example, you could have got Christian Darrisaw at the time, or maybe even if there was a deal where you've gone down a few spots and you got the player whose name I just keep forgetting every time we talk about it, and he's really good. The other lineman. What's his name?
Rashawn Slater.
Rashawn Slater. Rashawn Slater, his name is just completely left my system. I have no idea who he is anymore. So yeah, long and short of it is that Lions fan base, was it a positive reaction amongst everyone, or was it we wanted the flashy pick?
With all the polls that we did on Twitter, the voting came out very, very similar depending on who was listed as to who we wanted. But it was split very evenly between people like Waddle, Chase, Sewell, Fields. So 75% of the people were going to be upset one way or the other. Slater was someone that the fan base really liked. I think that he perhaps was viewed slightly not as a more premium pick as Sewell was, because Sewell has maybe an inch or two on him and slightly longer arms, and so people were projecting Slater as perhaps going to be a more interior pick, so less premium and kind of falls a little. But I think probably they're on equal standing in terms of quality. It's just that little bit of physics which is going to hurt him a bit. In terms of the holes on the team, there are so many, right? The Lions are 31st ranked in terms of wins expected by Vegas. And that's not a surprise because it's year one, it's a rebuild, no matter what the front office want to call it, we are rebuilding. So is your aim that you want to win as many games now, or is it that you want to win a Super Bowl in 5 years' time? And, if you have that long-term perspective, you need to hit on your pick. And so, the boom bust rate does matter. And, a wide receiver comes in and maybe Goff does look better, and maybe Goff does complete a bit more. And maybe you get, 7 and 10, 8 and 9, and you find yourself picking at 14. And it's like, okay, that's great. Well done. Why didn't you get a pick that's going to mature into year 2, year 3, pick 5th or 6th this year? You've not tanked because you've taken someone who's potentially better, but you end up getting a much better pick in the coming year, potentially. I think in terms of the long-term plan, this regime has got time. So they don't have to win this year. They don't have to get the pick that's going to move the needle in year 1. So I really wanted Waddle. I think he was the one I kind of fell in love with in the process. I think his ceiling is best wide receiver in the NFL. Just how I feel about him. He is so fast. He's got all the route running. I really, really like Jalen, but he wasn't there. And Sewell was the next best for me. But I think that Sewell was always the guy they wanted. And I don't know, I'm sure you've seen the video of our front office celebrating, but if you haven't, it's a good watch.
I honestly, when I saw you guys celebrate, I went, you've taken a wide receiver. You've taken Devontae Smith.
Straight in the group.
I said that straight in the group when they've taken Devontae Smith. And then when it came out, Penei Sewell, I was shocked because all it reminded me was exactly the way that Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys celebrated in the 2020 draft when they celebrated, and everyone was like, well, who have they picked? And they went and took the wide receiver, took CD Lamb. And I remember watching a podcast a few days later, I think it was The Herd, it was one of the big ones. And he was like, front offices don't celebrate about a linebacker or an offensive lineman like they do for like a wide receiver. So that's immediately where my mind went to. But like you said, I think that's the guy they wanted. And maybe in some of their minds, they were like, God, I can't believe he's fell to us. It wasn't.
They couldn't.
Yeah, that might have been that.
That's absolutely true. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, as we know, that goes on in the draft. There's a couple of rumors about which are kind of tricksy if they're true. So the Lions definitely called the Falcons to try and move up to 4. Now, we don't know why. So one theory is they were actually just trying to trade up to get Sewell. The other theory is that it was all a play because apparently they might have said they wanted to take Chase ahead of the Bengals at 5. And news about that kind of got around to bait the Bengals into taking Chase rather than taking Sewell, who was who we wanted. So, there's potentially the multi-level thing going on. I'm not sure I entirely buy that theory, but it does say to me that Sewell was the guy that they wanted all along. I watched kind of the highlights of that back when it came out, maybe a day later or two, with the sound on loud. And my girlfriend turned to me and said, "Why are you watching fireworks?" And I was like, "No, it's just our general manager. Don't worry about it." It was absolutely insane. But I do think this pick means that the team's going to be in a better place in year 3 and 4 of this contract. And my aim is to be not just competing for the division, but a Super Bowl in 4 years' time. We have 2 first-round picks next year, 2 first-round picks the year afterwards. Goff can be cut after this season with a little bit of pain, or the season afterwards with much less pain. And if we do end up being a really bad team, which is entirely possible, we could be running with Spencer Rattler in 2022. So, I don't know how he's going to work out, but he's the presumptive number 1 at the moment. We all know that one more year can absolutely change that. But this team could be very, very good, especially with the NFC North just kind of imploding right now. If Rodgers leaves, there are no good teams in the NFC North. So I think a division title is not out of the realm of possibility in 2023-24.
Oh, Andrew, I'm going to let you go ahead with the Spencer Rattler stuff, mate, because all that.
I mean, it'll be Spencer Rattler or what, Sam Howell or someone like that. Spencer Rattler might go first pick. I mean, it's going to probably be to the Texans over anyone, really, isn't it? But you've lost 2 massive wide receivers, in Golladay and Jones. And personally, I don't think you've replaced them with a wide receiver 1. You've gone for an O-line in the draft, and you've got added Jamal Williams, and there's talk of you adding Todd Gurley. Do you think this is a sign that the Lions are going to move forward in the future as a run-first offense? And is it a sign of the way you might come out and play?
I think that they want to dominate up front. I'm not sure that necessarily means that they want to be run first. I think that you can dominate up front in pass blocking too. So I think it's all about being physical. If you have a look at our draft class, we went offensive tackle, defensive tackle, defensive tackle. And so, that looks like they want to build on the trenches. But the front office have preached, this is about taking the best player available. And they've said, we have plenty of holes. So whoever we're going to take is going to improve this team. It's not really about where. We're just going to take who we think is the best player on the board. And I think that is genuinely how it felt. So I think if they had tried to pick for need, they would have gone elsewhere. Our defensive line is pretty poor. It was last year anyway. We could not stop the run. You only have to look at what Aaron Jones did to us twice. That was pretty humiliating. But if you have a look at the Vikings and the Bears, they've got great rushing attacks too. So stopping the run has to be something that we can do if we want to compete in the years to come. So I think in terms of long-term aim, I think what we've done is really, really good. So we are going to want to dominate up front. I don't think the picks necessarily were indicative of any sort of plan of we must go on the offensive and defensive line. It's just how it felt. They were looking to trade up back into the first round as well. That's one thing that came out of presses. They wanted to trade up from 41 to get Levi Onwuzurike. Got the name wrong. Onwuzurike, beg your pardon. So he wanted to trade up into the late 30s to pick him up, and they were persuaded to wait by the rest of the guys in the room, and he fell to us at 41. But they definitely viewed him as a first-round pick, so I know they were elated with him as well.
I think when you analyze it like that, when you say best player available, because I've got here, I felt like Andrew is right about it. It looks like you're going to be run first and things like that. Because I think when you look at the O-line and the start, and you bring Goff in and whatever, the style looks like it could be like 2018 Rams, where not much a wide receiver, but you got a hell of a run game. DeAndre Swift, though only rushed for 114 rushes, 521 yards, 8 touchdowns, it's clearly a talent. We can all see he's clearly a talent. But like you said, if you're just going with best player available and really happy when you get that player, I know you can say you're happy about getting any player you want, but actually, like with the gossip you had there with it maybe went to go into the first round to get Levi Onwuzurike, but they got him at 41 anyway, and they're obviously really pleased with that. Then why you don't need too much movement in the draft. If you're just happy to do that, you're happy to sit there and get the guy that you need, especially when you've got holes. That's a good strategy to do. And like you said, you go into next year with 2 first-round picks. One can assume you won't have a great record, but you never know. Like I said, the NFC North at the minute seems a bit of a dicey one with whatever's happening with Rodgers, and the rest of the teams aren't incredibly strong. Then it doesn't matter who you pick this year, because it's actually looking for the 4-year plan, the 3-year plan, but it's the bigger picture. Are you hoping that it's been a bit unsteady with the management system in Detroit, and Dan Campbell's new coach didn't really work out with Matt, head coach? Are you hoping that they stay confident with him, that they don't let him go too quickly? I mean, the coach before he was there for 3 years in the end. So I think it's not like it is a revolving door of coaches, but it's not been like there's been a coach that's been consistent there for a while at that head spot anyway. Are you hoping that this will change with Dan Campbell, and that even if it is a poor first season or maybe even a poor second season, that there is a bit more of a 5-year plus plan rather than what it has been?
Yeah, that they've talked about it being a long-term plan. The ownership have come in and talked about it being a long-term plan. We've got a kind of new-ish principal owner in Sheila Fordham, and she's a lot more visible than her mother Martha Ford and the previous owner, her husband Bill. She's taking a big role in what's going on. She's buying into the process that everyone else is talking about as well. And actually, a lot of the signings we've made in free agency have listed her as a reason why they've come. So that's really encouraging. You don't want an interfering owner, from a lot of organizations, especially someone say like the Jags, that you don't want your owner interfering with what's going on. But she's been great in coming in and kind of aiding the process. And I think what that's going to do is create buy-in for the ownership with the front office. I do think that they are not expecting anything from this year. I think they are making moves which are not obviously tanking. In fact, I think they're making moves which are the best thing for the franchise, but they're not necessarily the best thing for year one. And I think their expectations will be realistic. The fan base, on the whole, is not expecting some things. One of our biggest fan sites, Pride of Detroit, which is part of the SB Nation network, kind of put an out poll on there and kind of said, what do you think our win total is going to be? And I think the majority of people said 4 or 5 wins. Mm-hmm. So the fan base is not expecting anything this year. And, if we go 1-16, is that any worse than going 4-13? I mean, I would argue not at that point. I'm not a fan of tanking ever, but I kind of like it when it comes to draft time. On draft day, I'll be like, I don't feel so bad that we lost those couple of games at the end of the year. So once you're, mathematically eliminated, I don't care about that sort of thing. And I think the ownership will see that too. The previous regime, Patricia, was an absolute disaster. And I think that if there's one thing you could say about ownership is that maybe they kind of hung on too long to him. That Sheila Fordham came in as a first-year owner and gave him 1 more year to kind of finish off his 3-year plan. But it was clear to, well, not me, because I wanted him to get another year as well, but to a lot of people that the players weren't being developed. The players weren't getting better. The scheme was outdated and it just wasn't working. They didn't get the players to fit the scheme they wanted in the end. So you only have to look at Jelani Tavai, who was a 2nd-round pick a couple of years ago. And he is a linebacker with a low RAS score, not very fast, but a very big body linebacker, perfect sort of Patriots, Miami could do a job with him sort of guy. But Patricia couldn't instill that scheme and make it work here. Now, Tavai has come into camp this year and he's shed 20 pounds. And he looks like a kind of more athletic, more speedy guy. He's still going to be a bit slower than your average linebacker, but it looks like he's going to be productive in the scheme we're running now, which is the scheme which pretty much everyone runs to a certain extent in terms of 3-4-3, whatever. But most people don't play in base; they play in the nickel and the dime. and a lot of them need speedy linebackers. And so, you know, the regime, the biggest thing about the regime is that they blew up what happened with the previous regime, took us down to our lowest ebb, and then we didn't rise back up again because it didn't work.
Yeah.
So I think if we'd taken on the coaching staff that we have now from not the regime before, but the regime before that, that we'd have actually elevated into a playoff team by now. I really do. So one of the underrated things about the Lions right now is how good our coaching staff is and how much NFL experience is on there. So if I just take a quick look at that, we've got Anthony Lynn, who I think you could argue didn't fail as a head coach. That O-line was absolutely terrible at the Chargers, and yet the quarterback still looks fantastic. And I think that says a lot. I think that he's a guy who people really want to play for. Mark Brunell is the quarterback's coach, Pro Bowl quarterback with the Jags, amongst others. Antoine Randall L, everyone knows him. He's our wide receivers coach. You've got Aaron Glenn, who was obviously a fantastic cornerback throughout his time, and he's our defensive coordinator. Todd Wash is our D-line coach, and he was the defensive coordinator at the Jags for the last 5 years. You've got Aubrey Pleasant, who was a fantastic cornerbacks coach, secondary coach from the Rams, and you've got Don Capers as a kind of special advisor, and he effectively created the scheme that we're playing about 25 years ago. So we have expertise everywhere. And because Dan Campbell is a guy who likes to delegate, which is something he didn't do at the Dolphins. He had an interim spell as head coach of the Dolphins in 2015, and he tried to kind of micromanage a bit. He felt responsible for everything that happened and took a lot to heart as well. And I think that experience is so valuable because at the end of the day, a head coach can't do everything. A head coach who tries to do everything well, unless you're Bill Belichick, is going to do everything badly. So the fact that he can delegate to people that he trusts who have lots of experience and success in this league means that he can concentrate on actually getting the little things right, kind of just putting the finishing touches on things, instilling culture without having to actually really coach these guys too hard. I think we're set up for long-term success. It might not happen, but you've got to give yourself a chance. And the biggest indictment on the previous regime is we didn't have a chance, and it was never going to happen.
Yeah, hopefully the chance will be there for this coaching staff. Matt, it's been really great having you on, my friend. Where can we find the Roar the Lions podcast and all your social media, mate?
So on Twitter, we're ROTL_UK, and that's the same on Twitch. So we stream live on Twitch and YouTube. You can find us on Roar the Lions UK on YouTube and on Facebook. And then we've got articles and links to various bits and pieces on the website, which is roarthelionsuk.com. Thanks so much, guys, for having me on. It was great.
It's more than fine. All you Lions fans out there, go check out their website, go check out their YouTube, subscribe to their YouTube and like their videos as well as ours. We'll be back very soon on to the Panthers, and we'll be talking about JC Horn in our next episode. But thank you everyone for the support we've had so far. We've had nearly over 500 views on the Zach Wilson video, which we had no idea that the Jets and Zach Wilson was going to be so watched, but it was. And thank you. And we're nearly up to 100 on the video we did before. So I really appreciate all your support out there, and we'll see you all again very soon.